Experience Dungeons and Dragons like you've never experienced before.
So girls, tell us about Dave.
So,
Tell me how great I am.
Dave's a little drunk and all.
Feel the tension.
Like some chips.
They don't have any chips.
Feel the excitement.
29 more javelins.
You gonna throw another javelin?
Well, 29 more.
Epic storytelling.
This island, as all the locals know, is the island of Atlantis, and you are not welcome here.
And with no swearing or profanity of any kind.
Ah, jeez.
This is
Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters.
Find out more at dungeonsdragonsdaughters.podbean.com, your favorite podcast service or preferred social site.
we're also on YouTube.
Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network. Find out more at www.blockpartypodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we focus on the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the ego of all the people at the table. I'm one of your hosts, Dungeon Master John.
And I'm your other host, Dungeon Master Mitch. And today, we are returning to our Bringing the Magic of Magic to D&D episodes with our second Monsters of the Multiverse. We, of course, have our guest, Magic Mark, most frequent guest, as he likes to always point out. And today we're talking about the Soltari and the Praetors. So get ready for that. That's all coming up. But John, before we get into the meat, we have some 5-star reviews.
Our first 5-star review comes from Bomber Kid 90, and it's entitled Fascinating and Inspiring. Truly a podcast for anyone who loves creating stories. Since listening, I've stopped dismissing ideas as too daunting to flesh out and tackle them head on with some extremely practical advice. Thank you so much, Bomber Kid 90.
Yes, thank you so much. We appreciate that review. Our next one comes from Vladimir Teeps and is entitled Wow, Just Wow, 5 stars. Took me a while to find this podcast, and when I did, I binge listened until I was completely caught up. This podcast is so helpful in so many ways, it's impossible to list them all here. I've been DMing since I started in the mid-'80s, and I believe any level of DM can get a lot from this podcast. I have been listening to Dungeon Masters Mitch, Dungeon Master Chris, so sorry he had to leave, and all the others that have come after them. That's you, DM John. You can get great advice for every part of your game, including your players and having a nice, friendly atmosphere. I am looking forward to many more episodes chock full of tips, tricks, and helpful hints, as well as DM weightlifting that I can listen to in the future. Thanks, guys. You helped me with things I didn't even know I needed help with. And thank you, Vladimir Teeps. Very much appreciate that awesome review.
Our next one is from Jin42, and it's entitled All the Way Around the World, 5 stars. This podcast is amazing. I am living in northern Thailand, and as a first-time DM, it is a little difficult to get good resources for D&D here. But this podcast has been a real inspiration for me all the way on the other side of the world. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jin42. Have fun DMing in Thailand. That sounds amazing.
And with that, let's head to the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meats?
The plate meat's back on the menu, boys.
Welcome to another segment of The Meat. We are, as we said in our intro, back with our Bringing the Magic of Magic to D&D series, and we're talking about 2 more monsters of the multiverse today, the Soltari and the Praetors. So, we're talking about Magic the Gathering, bringing it to D&D. So welcome back, Magic Mark.
Hey, everyone.
Magic Mark, who's the most frequent guest on this show?
I believe, unless it's changed recently, this guy.
Okay, you just pointed to yourself. Podcast listeners can't see that, but...
Some of them might be able to.
Some of them might be able to. Those with the special superpower, the ability to actually see audio, can tell what just happened.
Yep, all the Jimi Hendrixes that are out there listening.
Okay, so let's get into it. In this Magic the Gathering series episode, we're going to look at 2 more monsters of the multiverse that is Magic the Gathering, starting with the Soltari. So let's talk about the Soltari. What are the Soltari?
White creatures in Magic, and pretty much they're like these ghost-like, shadowy creatures trapped in between planes.
Yeah, they're like the spirits of what used to be the Soltari. So now the Soltari are just spirits. But like you said, they're trapped in between the plane of Dominaria, which is their homeworld, and Wrath, which is this artificial plane. And they're trapped in this place called the Shadows, which, like you said, John, is like this extra planar space in between those 2 planes.
The shadows where they live kind of reminds me of how the Eldrazi also live in between the planes, but I don't think it's called the shadows for them. It's just that they live in between planes and they don't live in any one plane.
Yeah, the Eldrazi live in like what's called the blind eternities, which is basically their equivalent of space in Magic. So it's all the space in between all of the planes. And then I feel like the Soltari exist in the space between these 2 particular planes. So if we're taking the analogy, the Eldrazi live in all of space, dark space, deep space, all that kind of stuff, whereas these 2 live between Earth and Mars, for lack of a better analogy. Maybe more like Earth and the Moon, because they can interact with both. So they're in this particular chunk of the space.
And that's where they're specifically the thing that makes the Soltari cool in Magic the Gathering is their shadow ability, which in Magic means that they can only block and be blocked by other creatures with shadow. So it gives, in D&D terms, like they're incorporeal and they're on a different plane, like the extra planar plane. And with that, they can only affect creatures on that plane that are with them. I think in the lore, it specifically says they are unable to communicate, and they do find ways to do that. But in general, like that was the problem, is that they're trapped in between these planes. And so they can see, which is kind of cool, but they can see into both planes of existence, but they're outside of those worlds. So they're unable to affect those worlds.
Yeah, it's very similar in D&D terms to like a ghost, because they exist in the ethereal plane and they interact with both, but they're mostly ethereal. And I think the interesting aspect of these is if you run into a ghost, you just go, I hang out in the ethereal plane and I can interact with the ghost. Whereas these might be, you see them in the material and the ethereal, and they're both like a ghost no matter what. So they're kind of in that in between. So when you go to like interact with them, you still can't quite get to where they are.
Although the difference being that with a D&D ghost, they can communicate. They can disappear and not have any interactions with you, but they can also show themselves, reveal themselves, and communicate with the living. Whereas the Soltari typically cannot do this.
I imagine lots of interactions of your players coming around a corner in a dungeon and you see like footsteps just going away just around the next corner and you never quite catch up to where they are. And then when you finally do, it's just like this almost hollow person that's trying to speak to you, and you see the mouth moving, but you hear no words. And then maybe your wizard's like, I go to the ethereal plane because I'm going to try and interact there. And it's, you can describe the same thing exactly the way it was all over again. So there's these moments that you can provide where it's like multiple layers of mysteries, and maybe your whole quest is figuring out how do you get to this in-between space. You could even think of it more like a permanent large pocket dimension that they're trapped in, so you have to find that one bag of holding that all of them are like inside of.
The shadows is in a bag of holding.
Or other source of pocket dimensions, you know.
I do like that idea that there are signs that they are there, but maybe they, unlike ghosts, they cannot reveal themselves and communicate. But the way that you brought it up, Mark, I think of those paranormal shows where people like ghost hunters and stuff, and you don't see a ghost, but they hear like the creaking of a door or something happens that they're like, oh, this is strange. I can't quite explain that. And I mean, I can explain it. It's somebody off screen throwing the the vase down onto the ground.
No, Mitch, it's real. It's real. I've seen it.
But I like that idea in a D&D sense that you could be dropping all these hints of this shadows or whatever you would like to call this with these creatures, the Soltari, and they are like, they're seeing you, and little things that they do might actually affect the environment, but they cannot reveal or communicate to you directly.
Yeah, I do really think that the best way to put these into a D&D setting is similar to, for lack of a better way of putting it, real world ghosts. I put air quotes up, but again, you guys can't see that. But these like real world ghosts, whereas like in D&D, there's a ghost, you see it, you interact with it. It's more present than what real life ghosts are like, where, you know, there's little hints of them here and there, and there's mysterious actions, but you never quite, you know, see that Ghostbusters shadowy figure just up in your face or whatever it's doing.
Are you saying you don't hang out with the ghosts in your house?
No, as far as I know.
They don't watch TV with you?
Yeah, I mean, they might watch TV with me, but I mean, how interactive are you when you're watching TV?
Are you saying that the ghosts do watch TV with you, John?
Yeah, they have the best comments.
So one thing that I'm wondering how you guys, I brought it up a little bit at the beginning, but I'd like to hear what you guys think about this. So the Soltari are thrown into this shadows by some cataclysmic event, and they're then trapped there, and it describes them as spirit-like creatures. So my question to you guys is, like, do you take this in the lore, and if you were to bring the Soltari into your D&D worlds, are they spirits? Are they dead? Or are they still like alive? Will the Soltari still have lifespans that they eventually will die? Like, it's just that they are spirit-like because they're in this spirit-like plane of existence, but they're still living creatures? Or is this literally their souls that are trapped there?
If I were going to put these in a D&D setting, I would make them echoes of a recently destroyed plane. So you have this plane of existence that's absolutely gone, and the destruction of this plane, however it happened, kind of sent these souls screaming at the plane that your players are on. And you see these echoes that may or may not be able to interact with you at all, but it's just kind of like little flashes of living things that are no more. Almost like if you see the explosion happening, the souls kind of like expand out, and maybe they just blip through your plane and then they're gone. So if you're not in the right place at the right time, there's no sign of them. Or you can make it this big event for your world where all of a sudden, like for a week, ghost-like things are happening all over everywhere, and then after that week's over, you're like, they're gone. You can kind of play around with that kind of whole mysterious thing, and maybe that's a whole campaign investigating why did these happen and where do they come from and how do we find it out.
I like the idea of every time you travel between a certain two planes, you see these guys in the midst of traveling in between. Sometimes you feel like somebody grabbing you while you're traveling. Ooh. Or like you remember hearing a voice. Have you ever like had goggles in a pool and like looked so that you could see underwater and above water at the same time?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So right when you hit that moment in between the planes, you just see these guys like standing in both spots. Like you see like their perfect reflection like on both planes. So you'd be like looking at them and also looking at them because they exist in both. And they, like, as soon as you got all the way into the ethereal plane, they'd disappear. Or as soon as you went all the way back, they'd disappear again. But while you're channeling, like if you're a wizard or your wizard is bringing you, you would see these guys and be like, what the heck was that? Like, that wasn't a ghost.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that this is like a wizard or sorcerer or warlock, or like some sort of magic class is using the ability to plane walk, and they are going into a different plane of existence. And you as the DM can add this kind of lore into your world that there are these Soltari people. I mean, this is something that starts a side quest, like you said, John. Like it's not something, it's not the focus, it's not what the players are there focused on doing, but you give them this because this is a big thing that just happens. And you know, it'd be great to hear the lore that gets created in your worlds, the homebrew worlds, because of the experience that wizards have doing this. Like, they can never get to this plane of existence, but in every time they jump from different plane to different plane, they're seeing a glimpse of this for just this brief moment, and they call them like planar ghosts or whatever they would come up with this name of. It's the Soltari people who are trapped in this realm that's in between. And I imagine just there are going to be like wizards and sorcerers and scientists that are going to like put their entire lives into studying this strange phenomenon. And like, is this real? Is this, like Mark, you were saying, like remnants of like an old plane? Like, is it just like it's like you're watching a TV program rather than it is like something real, but they're going to be putting their research into it. And maybe they come up with the wrong theory and say, oh, this is just a mirror of history. Whereas no, it's these Soltari people who are trapped there, want out, need help getting out, but how do you get there?
Yeah, you even have like classes that aren't traditional magic users, like the monk with Shadow Step and the whatever subclass it is.
Yeah, that you can give them that brief moment of like seeing.
Every time you teleport, regardless of what the source of power that teleports you, you feel a tug at your cloak as you enter and exit.
And as a player, if you as the DM say you describe that experience and they're just trying to like get away from a battle or whatever, and you just describe that experience to them, they're going to stare at you and be like, what? Can I get more information? And you're like, no, I'm just describing to you what you experience. Like you want more information, like, okay, role play it out. Figure out how you're going to find more information. But I'm just describing to you how this spell like takes effect. So, but they're going to want more and they're going to be interested.
This whole race is just a tease for for play.
It really is.
This thing happened. Can you tell me more? No.
But really, this is something that could be brilliant, as like you could go into it with like whenever somebody is traveling to a different plane where they get this glimpse, or like you said, Mark, they're shadow walking or whatever, they get this glimpse, and you could like for 3 campaigns just be like, the only time I'm going to ever bring this up is when this is happening. But then later down the line, you can have a campaign centered on the Soltari, freeing them, being them,
creating them,
whatever you decide that campaign is. You could play a campaign where you are the Soltari people and the end of the campaign is getting thrown into the shadows. And then another campaign, you're not the Soltari people, but you're working on freeing the Soltari. This is like a big payoff. If you plant those seeds, like John's saying, where you're like giving them glimpses, that's a bigger payoff when you finally do decide this is the campaign we explore this in. That being said, obviously you have to hope that your wizard uses plane shift. You have to hope your monk uses shadow step, and you have to be on top of it and remember at that time to give this little bit of info if that is the case.
Yeah, you gotta have it on every page of notes, like circled and highlighted in the corner. If teleport, then
one of the things we didn't discuss is that the Soltari in Magic the Gathering, they eventually get some sort of way of communication. There's one card, Soltari Emissary, that leads to this idea that like spirits, like ghosts, they have, at least some of them have the ability to possess living creatures. And so they are called emissaries. They're living creatures that are able to speak for the Soltari. Now, whether that has to be a willing possession or not, that's kind of up to you. Because maybe this possession, maybe them being trapped, the way that this starts is someone on the material plane has to figure out a way to speak to these creatures. I like to think of like maybe the way that this kind of starts is even if there's like a certain device or there's certain parts of the world where you can see into that shadow place, like there's a well of water that you can kind of see into it, or there's just a cut open in the air that you can kind of glimpse. If you stand at a certain angle, you can see into the shadows. That and the coupling of wizards traveling to different planes, like looking into this, the people on the material plane finally figure out a way to get to that shadow plane of existence. And then how do you have that emissary of the Soltari come back? There's this working out of like, I will willingly give my body to be possessed by you so that you can speak for your people.
Every time I think about like possession and stuff, regardless of what it's from, I always think of that scene from Independence Day where the thing wraps its tentacle around the guy's neck, and he's like planted up against the glass and doing that like whisper voice that I'm not going to do right now. And so that's how I would role play kind of this moment, be it on purpose or on accident, where maybe your wizard is teleporting and the spell gets dispelled kind of like in the middle. And so they get this moment where the Soltari can actually get like enough of a grasp that once the spell is dispelled, so he gets yoinked back to point of origin, all of a sudden he's like messed up and possessed by this thing for however long. And that's how you get your emissary.
I also want to throw in, I really like magic gone wrong as a flavor to a story. So like you could have these scientists trying to get in between the planes, so they like try to stop the ritual halfway through, and instead of like getting halfway there, half their body gets into the ethereal plane and the other half is chopped off still here.
Just the legs just drop to the ground.
Yeah.
That's horrifying.
You just get like sliced in half, and they're like, now what do we do?
I like the idea of, starting off like with this people. And here's the thing. You're using this as the homebrew in your homebrew world. They don't have to be called the Soltari. Use the Soltari as from Magic the Gathering as inspiration to doing something along these lines in your world. What if in your homebrew world there was a moment in time where this cataclysmic event, whatever you want it to be, something magical, something divine happens, and an entire race in your world just up and disappears? The people that remain on the material plane, they're left thinking like, what happened to this people? They just all disappeared, up and disappeared. The people group who did disappear, they're in this place, the shadow, the in-between, whatever you want to call it, still able to see everything going on the material plane, but unable to communicate. And how long does that stay that way? Like, is it figured out in their lifetime, or is it like something that continues on for a long, long time, and your world now is just devoid of whatever race it is that happens with?
Yeah, how long is Will Byers on the Upside Down?
All right, so that's the Soltari. Let's jump into the next monster that we're here to talk about. Maybe describing it as monster is not the correct way to do it because, well, Mark, why don't you introduce us to the Praetors?
The Praetors are a pretty unique group of creatures. They're from New Phyrexia. Well, I think they're from Phyrexia in general, but mostly New Phyrexia. And they're actually the ruling class. So there's only, I think, 7 that have been published by Magic, but 5 in this particular context.
I want to say there are only 5 true Praetors. Yeah.
They used the creature type before, but there's 5 true Praetors. And they are from Phyrexia, which pretty much everything that's in there once it becomes New Phyrexia is like this techno-organic artifact creature, kind of weird amalgam of both artificial and organic.
Yeah. They're living. They have, like, some of them even are humanoid-ish, but they have some sort of metallic component to them. They're like machine-like in appearance and also in their mindset when you break down each of them.
Yeah, so I think the official terminology, if I remember correctly, is something like the plane of New Phyrexia is nothing but metal, death, and tissue. So it's not so much like living things like life as we think of it, but more of almost the organic has been manipulated into making machines more efficient at what they do. So the Praetors themselves are the pinnacle of the leadership, representing the different perspectives within New Phyrexia and like the ruling class. And because Magic, there's 5 of them and 1 for each color is kind of how they divide them up. I like to think of them as representing the worst of each color respectively.
Yeah, going through this, I don't know, John, if you had any different thoughts on this, but I didn't read any of these and think, I could be on this guy's side. It was all like, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad, that's worse. I think the closest one that I was like, okay, he's not maybe completely just terrible, was the red-aligned one, Urabrask.
I don't know, the blue guy didn't seem so bad.
All right, well, I guess agree to disagree.
Yeah, so typically in Magic, you think the white one's like the nice one. If there's going to be one, it's the white one. And the white one's like the militant Borg, where it's assimilate or die kind of perspective. I hate to use a Star Trek reference, but it's unfortunately the best pop culture analogy that we have.
All the Star Trek fans are loving it. So
Yeah. So they're like the Borg. The white Praetor is like the leader of the Borg, I guess.
yeah, I think the positive side that you would describe is that the white Praetor, which is Elish Norn, she wants unity among all of New Phyrexia. But it's like you said, it's convert or just convert. You don't have a choice.
It's conform or die. Yeah. Those are your options.
Indoctrinate is her motif. So she often goes by the title of Praetor of Unity. So it's not unity in a nice sense that we would all like to get behind.
Yeah, it's the unity where you kind of eliminate all the variables. It is the worst in white, for sure, because that's the conform or die kind of aspect where, you've seen plenty of movies where the bad guy's all about, let's make everybody the same and that'll make everything great. And then all of the people working against it are like, let's have feelings and emotions. And so she's this big, huge advocate about kind of anti-emotional, which is anti-red in this particular circumstance.
So Jix Gataxius is the Praetor of the blue-aligned Phyrexian faction. He's pretty much an evil metal genius that does all these kind of weird experiments, like sociopathic experiments on people's minds, and tries to mind control people, basically. Like, of all the Praetors, I feel like in the actual card game Magic, all the stuff he does is a little broken. He makes your maximum hand size reduced by 7, so you just can't have cards anymore. Like,
he's a blue card, so...
Yeah, he's a little busted. Pretty much he looks like a worm with all these metal, like 2 metal appendages and all these metal spikes coming off of him. I don't think they really give a scale of how big he's supposed to be and how big a huge spiky monster is. So basically, Jin Gataxius is all about coming up with all of life's being like the perfect version it could be. Like, no holds barred. Through experimentation, I can figure out this is the best way everything should be just by seeing the end justifies the means. If this is better than this, then it's better. We can ignore everything we know from the past and use what our data has shown us to be the best.
Yeah, it's kind of a progress at any cost mindset, where we will do anything to move forward.
I mean, here's the thing. As we go through this, there are 5 Praetors. One of each different Magic the Gathering color. These are, in my mind, when we put them into D&D games, taking inspiration from them, you've got 5 boss crazy creatures here. 5 leaders of organizations in your world that they all want one thing, which is total control of the world in some certain type of fashion. And this specific leader is trying to experiment and create the best versions of everything best in his mind, which, like John said, like there's no limits to what you can experiment and do. To me, my question is like, not even a question. I feel like the villainous side of this is that it never, ever stops. They would look at humans, they would look at Captain America and be like, super soldier, let's make everybody a super soldier. Then once everybody's a super soldier, well, what's the super soldier? We need to make that next. Okay, we've got those. Now until everybody's like, until you have a world of Hulks running around and it's just decimated in chaos, and they're sitting in their like floating fortress above the chaos, just looking down to be like, my creations.
All right, what happens if I mix this Hulk with that Hulk?
Yes. It's like terrifying experiments. I mean, experiment for the sake of experiment to create the best thing possible in their mind. What is the best thing possible?
Yeah, this guy is like the biomancer bad guy who might have like half troll guardians and, all those like mixes of different races and different species and monsters. And like, there's no beasts in his lair. It's all monstrosities of some sort, of just all this like mess of like, all right, so let's take a lion and an eagle. We got a whole bunch of griffins hanging out, and how does he keep on making better stuff?
That's a fantastic idea there. Like, this type of boss creature in a D&D world, if you were to find his place, first of all, it would be like a lab. And you would find this could be the origin of creatures like chimeras, like owl bears. Like, that's a fantastic way to go. I mean, you look at all the disgusting and terrible like beholder types there are. Like, you take the beholder that's a mix of an illithid and a beholder, and it's like, this creature would be the one that would be like, yes, let's mix the power of a beholder and the power of a mind flayer and create this terrifying thing. That's what you're going to find in this place's domain.
And he's probably got even crazier ideas. You could even, if you're going world building mindset, you could be like, all right, my half orcs, they're not half human, half orc as like a breeding sense. It's this guy created a new race, and they're half human, half orc, but they can't interbreed like what you think of in a traditional sense. It's just he made half orcs.
Yeah.
And now that race exists, maybe mostly in a region just outside this guy's lab. And yeah, you could go big or small picture, whatever you want.
Well, and to me, once again, where does it stop? Eventually, he's going to take all the basic 7 races and go push them together. And what do you got? Bibbidi bobbidi boo.
You get some gray guy, the Greendale human beings.
You know what this guy reminds me of?
What's that, John?
You know, you'll probably know this better than me. Who's the doctor in Dragon Ball Z who created the androids in Cell?
Oh,
I want to say Dr. Moreau, but I know that's not right.
Dr. Jaresh?
Yeah, something like that. It's got a Z in there somewhere.
I don't know. Go listen to Geek Wars and figure out what the real name of the doctor is. But yeah, no, that's totally, like, that's a good example. This character, this monster, this creature, this boss, it's this crazy mad scientist to the nth degree where it's trying to change the entire world to be its vision of a better world.
Yep. And he's always looking to upgrade. So you might find metal bits strapped to just about everything.
So the next one is Sheoldred, and Sheoldred is the black-colored mana of the Praetors. Sheoldred is all about enslaving all of New Phyrexia, so everything will listen to Sheoldred, everything will obey Sheoldred. This is not a unity in the sense of Elish Norn, but this is like, I will take control and be lording over everything. The one thing that I found very interesting about Sheoldred is that Sheoldred is also a Praetor that knows so much information. She kind of looks like a spider, which gives me the idea of having webs and having spies everywhere so that she can get this information and use it to gain further control, to destroy her enemies. Because once again, we have another Praetor here who ultimately wants control over the entire plane of existence.
Yeah, I'd say being black, this is the most classically villainous, where domination and total control, where they are on top and nobody else is even close. Mindset is where it's at. This is your most classic villain.
So what I really like about Sheoldred is that what looks like her body isn't really her body. She's actually a snake that comes out of this crazy, like, spider creature. So I like to think that maybe that's how she mainly takes over things, is she just, like, stabs into them like a parasite and then controls their body. So you could be fighting her, like, using her as one of the final bosses, and she's riding this crazy monster, like some spider-like thing, and then you slice her out of it, or she leaves the body because the body's about to die, and then she just leaves and gets into, like, a bigger monster. Like, worst case, a Tarask, but, like...
Oh, gosh.
Like, some other crazy monster where she just burrows in and takes over its mind. Now that's like the bottom half of her body to like fight you guys.
You slay the creature and a small worm falls out and lands on you. Make a will save.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, wisdom save. We're in 5e now.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I mean, this whole idea of enslaving by any means possible, mind control certainly being on the table. They're really, when it comes down to all of these Praetors, ethics is pretty much out the window. It's not about ethics. When I refer to them as being machine-like in mind, like, that's basically what I feel like every one of these agendas is. It's like, no, we need to get to point A. It's not about how we do it. It's just get to point A.
All right. So up next we have Urabrask. He is the red Praetor. He is Urabrask of the Quiet Furnace. And his big thing is he was all about like reforging. I picture him as like the guy who's always trying to like take broken down old stuff and make it new through certain ways. And so his biggest thing is like, unlike Jix Jitaxis, the blue one from a little while ago, that guy's all about progress. This guy's all about like kind of making the new model, but still having like echoes of what it once was. So I think he's probably more like let's make a whole bunch of Captain Americas and then we're good. We're good at Captain America. We don't need to make it better. So his big thing is all about reforging and recrafting into like upgrading and modifying. And he's the guy who wants better gear, not necessarily a better body.
He's the one that he seems the least interested in what every one of these other Praetors are doing and just wants to focus on what he's doing. We get this idea that the furnace layer where he's at is below the rest of the surface world. So he's kind of down there doing his own thing, creating his own creations, and he's not really interested in the ridiculous things in his mind that the other Praetors on the surface are doing. Ultimately, though, eventually they're going to clash when he expands or when they expand to the furnace layer, like they're going to clash. But yeah, I mean, yes, I can maybe get alongside of your whole he would be creating super soldiers and then be good with them. But to me, like, and this is maybe me just placing my thoughts on this specific Praetor, I think that he would want to move away from everything organic and just be completely metallic and machine-like in every single way. So these would be super soldiers, but they would be artifact creatures 100%.
Maybe more going the DC cyborg direction.
Yes.
But eventually full robot. And to Ultron, because then we're going back into the better comics. So, yeah, I think he's probably the only one who's willing to like mind their own business out of all of them. There's all the like ones that are vying for dominance, and he's kind of like, I'm fine over here crafting away. He's that one player in the party that's always wants to craft and never leave town.
So the next Praetor we have is Vorinclex, and he's the Praetor of the Vicious Swarm. He leads the Green Phyrexian faction, and pretty much he uses his forces to try and take over just as everybody else is, but instead of changing everything, the strongest people are all going to consume the weaker people. Vorinclex seeks to achieve Phyrexian perfection by using the plane as one grand arena, subsuming the strong and devouring the weak. So the strong get stronger and the weak get eaten.
Yeah, I think of it almost as like this messed up gardener who's like, oh, that branch is dying, no use crying about it, cut it off. Only the strong will survive. And then he takes that branch and he uses it as to make mulch to feed the strong plants. It's the weak are there to feed the strong. That's all it is. And through this we'll create the strongest Phyrexia there is.
Yeah, very much survival of the fittest, very green, so it fits the flavor of the color. I've been playing a lot of Far Cry 5. I don't know if either of you guys have dipped into that, but there's one antagonist whose tagline is "Call the Herd." So he's all about, eliminating the weak, calling the herd, and so that we are now stronger at the end of it. It's very much those who are strong will survive and those who are weak don't deserve to.
Yeah, in a D&D game, I would imagine this monster or villain they want every single city to be fortified, to be a place where their defenses and their offenses are strong. There's no use for a weak citizen that's there only to be protected by the strong soldiers. Everyone better protect themselves and be able to be put into the fight at any time. Everyone and everything must be strong always.
He's also the most organic looking still. Like, he's still flesh and blood mostly.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's like he's got steel on him, like steel
metal plating, but yeah, more organic.
It's like armor almost, and metal claws like Wolverine, rather than his whole body is metal, like with a spinal cord.
Yeah. And I think he's a lot of he might be that bad guy that your party fights through waves of increasingly difficult enemies. And then you get to him and he's like, great job. You want to be my new bodyguard team? You want to work for me? Because you're clearly better than the guys I had. Not feeling anything about losing those who he had, because he's always looking for the next strongest thing. So if your party is the next strongest thing, he's looking to upgrade, but he's also looking to challenge you, so he knows he has the strongest. So he might be like, all right, now that you fought all my stuff, I'm going to be your new quest giver. Unless you guys have an issue with that as a party kind of thing. So it might create some interesting moral quandaries. Are you okay with being the one that's willing to call the herd and stuff like that?
I feel like most of the bosses would just try and recruit you based on what we said. Like, you beat everything else you get them to all right, well, you're clearly the most advanced. You could work for me, the blue guy. I guess the one who leads the swamp people, the black color, she would try and take over your body, but...
So here's my question. We've talked about the Praetors. So my question is, how would you guys bring them into a D&D homebrew world? How would you either use the Praetors themselves or be inspired by them to create 5 different creatures with these different goals, with these different mindsets, with these different philosophies?
Yeah, I think I would use them a lot as like a skeleton to build maybe like a group of factions within a city or a continent, however you want to scale it, where they each represent kind of like their moral perspectives, and you use that kind of to build the skeleton around an organization. And you have an individual that may or may not be exactly like what's in the picture as like the head of the organization, but then you kind of use these bullet points of like what they value as a way to kind of craft how that group would work within a city with this kind of struggling dynamic of each one wants to be in charge and each one wants to rule, and maybe even not all of them are ruling. Maybe there's like an actual king involved that's almost oblivious to this secret underworld that's having a huge tug of war underneath his city.
They all also seem like they would be lawful evil creatures rather than chaotic or neutral evil.
Yeah.
And I feel like I find it difficult to throw that in-to a lot of campaigns. So you could have, like, you could still, even if you're playing with all good players, like, interact with, if these are nations or groups in a city or however it's set up, you could still interact with them, like, civilly, because they're following all the laws and things. And say you needed to go up against the blue faction, but you could get help from the white and the red and the green factions just by trading with them or asking for hints, and they want to get rid of the blue faction as well, so you could play things off against each other even without having to make your characters be evil aligned. You know what I mean?
I think that's part of therein lies their weakness, is that they operate like machines, well-oiled machines, so you can figure out how that machine works and how to break that machine in certain ways. They can be, in my mind, the most merciless of villains and creatures, because it's not about mercy, it's not about emotions, it's about do this and get it done. But if you can figure out ways to throw a wrench in the gear, you might be able to topple the whole machine. I like the idea of them each coming from, rather than being a one plane vying for control of the plane itself, I like the idea that each one of these creatures can be inspired to create a leader of 5 different planes of existence, where it's like they've already 100% controlled, and like if you were to plane shift to one of those planes after you see the ghost people, the Soltari, along the way, you're gonna go to a plane that is all enslaved by this one Praetor, or it is all under this hive mind and this unity, or it's this crazy whack plane where all the creatures are like constantly being experimented on and created into like these mashed hybrids and these really strong, really powerful creatures. And you can almost like start a campaign by having something like breaks the barrier between your world and one of their worlds, or something breaks the barrier at like 5 different points in your homebrew world, that at each point these planes are coming in and now it's time to expand. They haven't been expanding for like millennia because they've had full control of their plane, but now doors have been opened and now you have a 5-way battle. How do you close these doors? How do you close these gates and stop any of these groups from winning and taking over your plane, your homebrew world?
Yeah, your plane becomes the battlefield for their war.
Yeah. Yeah, they wouldn't even, maybe they are 100% aware of each other, although they don't interact with each other. And they just see your world full of living people as just the in-between that they have to get through to get to the other places, because now finally, maybe that's it. They're not even interested in your world, except that it's like a highway into these other planes that they are like, finally, I can expand and I can go into these other planes that we've known about, but we've been closed off to for thousands of years.
All right, so it's an ancient adventuring party of 5. Each with different moral values, and they get to the culmination of their campaign and they all go their separate ways, each to a unique plane, and then they all come back millennia later having conquered those respective planes, and now they're here to fight.
They're all immortal,
Yeah.
and just hold on to grudges from that one adventure for thousands of years.
You stole my great axe.
I mean, I would want to be careful with this because if you're doing it in this way, I'd want the players that I'd be playing with to enjoy it and not be like, I don't think that's what would happen. But Mark, we've talked about cameos of old PCs, bringing them in. If I was 100% sure that or even just talk to you about a PC that you've played in my world and said, hey, I'd like to use this PC, and say that at the end of his life he went to this other plane of existence and started to create his own plane of existence because he became so powerful, whatever. In this campaign they were given godlike powers, and so you can have this PC return thousands of years later to a world that has long forgotten them, but it's this little moment where the players are like, oh my gosh, Mark, your PC is terrible now. He was a lawful jerk, and now he's a lawful tyrant that's controlling the whole plane, and now he's coming but it's over the whatever, he tapped into some magic or something got a hold of him that amplified everything in his being, and now he's just a monster, a terrifying creature that wants control in his own way.
Yeah, you could even craft a prequel one shot and have your players all play with the intent of even going into the story of I know that you guys are going to come into the next one.
John Quinn, you played in one of my first D&D campaigns, you played Eldragaza the Wizard. Eldragaza would 100% in my mind, but that's the thing, I'd want to make sure you were happy with it, and you're smiling, so I think you'd be okay with it. But Eldragaza was just this chaotic, I could see him being that experimental tyrant, taking thousands of years to get him there, but he eventually just becomes this thing that's wanting to experiment on everything just for the sake of experimentation.
Sounds pretty close to correct.
Well, hashtag Magic Mark, thanks again for joining us on a Magic the Gathering episode.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, always. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, talk D&D, Magic the Gathering, talk anything geeky that you enjoy, where can they get in touch with you at?
You can find me on Twitter at real_Rix, R-I-X. I'm moderately active on Twitter, probably not the most active, but I'm not dead. I get the notifications on my phone.
I'm not dead.
Yeah. I think last week I found out I had 120 some notifications. Most of those were just Twitter saying, these people said stuff. So I check my Twitter on occasion, and then you can always email the DMs block, and Mitch can forward that on to me. And yeah, I see him fairly often. So,
well, with that, let's head to the mailbag of holding.
But they've been asking for their mail on a daily basis. It's all they're talking about up there.
That right there is the mail. Now let's talk about the mail. Can we talk about the mail, please, Mac? I'm dying to talk about the mail with you all day, okay?
So today on the mailbag, I have an email from DM Vegas. And DM Vegas says, some of the players have started wanting to multi-class, and he's okay with that, but he thinks there should be a reason to multi-class. He gives an example that if someone wants to become a wizard or a warlock, they should somehow acquire a spellbook or make a pact with some almighty being before taking a level in that class. He doesn't want to restrict his players, but a wizard needs a spellbook. And he wants to hear what we think. Well, I think that is an awesome idea. I think that if, as the DM, if you want to just add more flavor to your game, really, you should get your players to role play out things they want to do before they do them. I guess that's a little too simplified, but if they want to become a wizard in the game, they should be talking about that. They should somehow be acting like, I'm a fighter right now. I love going around and killing people with my sword, but man, ever since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to shoot fireballs at my enemies. Back on the farm when I was hashing and slashing, I would hear stories about great and powerful wizards and sorcerers, and man, I trained with a sword, but I wish I had met a wizard to teach me wizard stuff. And then maybe in the game you go find somebody who can give him a spellbook or teach him some spells, or maybe find a super powerful, ethereal, any kind of being, and he becomes a warlock and somehow goes on to multi-class. Now he's a fighter with some wizard spells. I had a player in one of my games who was a wizard and found this really cool item that was it turned into a celestial piano when he used it. So he decided, because he thought it was so cool that now he had this piano, that he was going to multi-class in Bard. And so then when he leveled up, he took a level in Bard and learned to play this piano, and it made total sense. I also think you should tell your players this. Like, if you tell them that maybe their character has to have a reason to want to multi-class. They can't just be a fighter who's going around playing as a fighter and now all of a sudden has wizard levels out of nowhere. Like, I guess there's not really any rules against that, but you're the DM. You are all the rules. You don't even need the books. You could play Dungeons and Dragons without any dungeons, without any dragons, without any of the rules. When I play Dungeons and Dragons, it's less like Game of Thrones and more like It's Always Sunny. The gang goes to slay a dragon. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they are a magic class and they're a wizard or something, and or they're a wizard and traveling around with somebody who can use a sword, and they get them to teach them to use a sword in multi-class and fighter. If you have a wizard already in your party, wouldn't it make sense for a fighter to learn some wizarding spells from that wizard, or a wizard to learn some fighting skills from that fighter? Either or. There's a lot of different ways I think you could have it make total sense that somebody should be able to multi-class. When you read books, the main characters are never really just one of these classes. They're usually a multi-class character. Anytime you see a wizard in book, not any time, but a lot of times, they're also a sword master, and they can also command armies, and they're also great at all these other random things that it's like, how does one person get to be so good at everything? Especially if you're in a party with like a very diverse party, why wouldn't you be able to pick up skills from other people in the party and multi-class by learning from them? Every time you camp, I know a lot of people just skip through, oh, we sleep for the night, all right, you wake up the next day. All those empty hours that you didn't actually get to roleplay, even if as backfill, if you went and said, oh, during those hours, this person helped me train with a sword, or helped me do this, and maybe you want to go back and roleplay some of those moments out back in time, because it's funny to do that and have the wizard try and use a sword against the fighter or something in spar or anything like that. I think would make total sense for multi-classing. I hope that helped answer your question and gave you some great ideas. Thank you, DM Vegas, for writing in.
Well, we hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Bringing the Magic of Magic to D&D, specifically Monsters of the Multiverse, number 2, talking about the Soltari and the Praetors. John, if our listeners would like to get in touch with us, send us an email about Magic the Gathering and their ideas of bringing it into Dungeons & Dragons, or just anything to do with Dungeons & Dragons, where can they reach us at?
So you guys can email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. dungeonmasterblock, all one word. Also, if you guys like what you're listening to, you like the show, feel free to head over and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. It takes a couple minutes and we really appreciate it. And we'll read it on air just like we did at the beginning of this episode.
You can follow us on Twitter at DMS_block. That's at DMs block. And you can like our Facebook page. Go both of those places if you want updates about our show. We have a Patreon member shout out of the week, and this week's Patreon member shout out goes to Nate Brooms. Thank you so much, Nate Brooms. Nate is a bronze dragon, so thank you for your support, and we hope that you are enjoying all the rewards that you get from being a bronze dragon.
The Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network. You should check out our other shows like the GM Showcase, Geek Wars, and Detentions and Dragons, and more.
Well, that's all we have for you today on the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God,
killing characters,
and lowering the egos of all their people at the table.
That's all, folks.
And keep on dungeon mastering.
Goodbye.